Thanks for joining us for this week's live Q&A. Now, it's a rainy day today, but we've decided to get out into the apiary anyway. So what you'll find with conventional beekeeping is there's not much to do actually in your apiary on a rainy day. But here with the flow hive, we can actually still harvest honey in the rain because you're not taking apart the hive. If you take apart the hive on a rainy day, your bees will be very grumpy about it. A bit like if you had the roof pulled off your house on a rainy day, you'd go, hang on, that's just a bit too much. So what we can do with our flow hive is harvest honey on a rainy day. So what we're going to first do is have a look and see whether there's any honey ready in this hive. So if you have a look here, you've got some nice full and capped honey in the middle, and then you've got the filling pattern here where the bees are filling, so they're finding some flowers, which is great. We've had a few weeks of rain and the bees are still managing to collect nectar in between the showers, so that's very cool. Now if I have a look and in the side windows, just to give me a better idea of what's going on in the hive, oh there you go, look at that beautiful honey ready to be harvested. We might even just harvest that frame, and that way we know that it's all capped. When you've got a hive that doesn't look completely full like this, then it's a nice idea to harvest the ones closest to the edge actually, because sometimes you can get the center eaten by the bees as they grab some honey to feed their brood if they are a bit hungry. But here I can tell they're filling, so we could harvest the middle ones or we could harvest the edge ones. So to set up for that on a rainy day, you're better off harvesting into a big jar, otherwise you're going to sit there with your umbrella shuffling jars. Whereas if I set up a big 2-litre jar, which is how much honey fits in one of these frames, then we can just put a wrap over the top and let it harvest. And that's what we'll do while we answer some questions. So if you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll answer them as we go. Now what I'm going to do is dial in Trace, who's actually going to read out the questions today. So Trace, as you know, is our amazing customer support person who you often get when you ring up. Some of you will really recognise her, and she's always very helpful in sorting out your problems and answering your questions. Hey Trace, you there?
Morning, Cedar.
Okay, good. What we're going to do is just put it in my pocket, and hopefully the mic is close enough to get that. If you could just speak and give us a thumbs up out there if you can hear Trace.
Hey, morning everybody. Can you hear me out there?
Okay, that should work because I've got the microphone here. So, rainy day harvesting, what I'm going to do is connect these brackets right on to the hive here. And here we go, like that. And I'm going to use the door we pulled off as our shelf, which is the way our flow hive works. And that makes a nice shelf for harvesting honey. Now let's see if it's in the right position for these big jars. Perfect. You can move the shelf up and down as needed by just backing out the screws a little. The next thing we're going to do is grab our tube. Now we decided to do this edge frame because we can see it's capped, even though we can tell that the hive isn't completely full. There we go. And next we've got our key. We've got our key access cover up here. Now you notice that this hive is unpainted. We do recommend at least painting the roof, or you get more warping like you see here and not as good weather seal. But the cedar you can actually let go grey if you want to without a coat on it at all. It looks a bit patchy for a while, but eventually it'll go this beautiful grey silver colour. So I'm just about to turn this key and open up channels inside the comb like this. There we go. It's not too hard today. Sometimes it's very hard and other times it's not, depending on the propolis and the wax in the frame parts. And now the honey will be draining out from beneath their feet here, which you'll see pouring into the jar in just a second. And because it's a rainy day, we're going to have to cover that up to make sure that rain doesn't get in the jar. You don't want the moisture content too high, because that will actually increase the likelihood of fermentation. You want that nice thick honey, moisture content down below that 20% range. 18% is great, and that way it'll last forever, like it did in the Egyptian tombs for 3,000 years or so. Oh, that is beautiful. That's the Goya, which is a rainforest species we see out in this valley here, and it's a very aromatic and light colour that comes in the springtime, so that's a real joy to taste. Not too much rain at the moment. I can leave the cover off for a sec as I can then taste it. Yum yum. That is so good. Did I say I love honey? It's such a joy to taste all the different flavours, and it's often quite different frame by frame. You get a light colour like that in one, you get a dark colour in another, and all the different flavours to match. So any questions coming in? What we're also going to do today is, because in rainy weather, there we go, there's a bee coming. Let's cover up that jar now from rain and any bees that might come for the honey. In rainy weather, in humid areas like this, we're in a subtropical region, the hive beetles can really take hold and turn your beehive, if you're not careful, into a hive beetle nest instead of a beehive, which is slimy and horrible to clean up, and then you've got to get more bees again and so on. So in rainy weather like this, if you find a weak colony, good idea to activate your pest management tray, catch a few of those beetles. If you get what's called a slime out from the small hive beetle, it's usually a secondary problem where your queen's failing and the colony's shrinking, and there's not enough bees to really keep those hive beetles under check. A bunch of them lay thousands of eggs in your frames, a lot usually in your brood frames mainly, and then can turn into a slime out. Look at that beautiful honey flowing in, that's awesome. Right, any questions coming in?
Yeah, Cedar. We've got a question through YouTube from Hobo's Gold going, any reason why the bees are capping cells in the middle with honey and haven't done the outside yet? Been waiting for ages and still can't harvest.
So if you're seeing full frames in the centre, then you can go ahead and harvest a few frames. That's one of the great things about a flow hive, is you can just keep tapping off frames as they are full. Of course, if you're worried about the bees not having enough honey for themselves, then just harvest less honey. Harvest a frame and leave the rest for the bees. You still get a big jar of honey for the family. Now, they generally fill the centre and then out to the extremities. So if you're only seeing honey in the centre, then and none in the window, it'll just take time and you'll need some patience. However, you do get some bees that just never fill the rear window, and that's a bit tricky. You have to look down between the frames to see the capping. If you see it in the side windows, both side windows are all capped, and you're still not seeing it here, then you might just have some of those bees that don't like to fill the end. Occasionally you get a hive like that. And harvest, because this is a beautiful view that really tells a story. But if they're not using the last cell lines of the frame, then first of all make sure there's no light getting in. If light's getting in or you've left the cover off, then they will retract the honey away from that area. If you find that they're just a type of a breed of bees that just doesn't like to fill the edges, then you may need to have a look at the frames by inspecting them, pulling them out with your tool like I've shown you on lots of videos, and just check to see whether they are indeed full on the inside, and that will really tell you whether it's okay to go and harvest, and also let you know that in future you can have a little look down between the frames here and look for that capping and match that up with honey in the side windows, and still get a good idea of when to harvest, even though you're not seeing it here. Look at that. We've got a lot of honey in a short space of time just pouring out of the hive. That is gorgeous. Yum. Okay. What I'm going to do is show you how turtles. Very humid time at the moment. In the rainy, humid summers here, we get a lot of hive beetle attack. They love that rainy time. So what we're going to do is just put some cooking oil in the tray. So here we have a tray. Let's see what's going on in here. So it's been lots of rain this week in some flooded areas and so on. Okay, only a very tiny bit came in the front. Sometimes you'll get a lot more water in the tray than that. So what I'm going to do is just give it a quick clean out. Now you could take that back and hose it and so on, but often just to remove some of the debris like that. Now if there is honey in there from some harvesting, then just make sure the bees aren't going to go for that. But you can see how easy it is with your hive tool just to remove the debris enough to then put your cooking oil in and catch some of those hive beetles. Okay, turn it around to get the other side. There we go. And when you put your cooking oil in, you don't need to cover, you don't need to fill the tray up. You only need to cover the bottom. So I'll show you how to do that too. Working on a vaguely level surface is useful, but all we're going to do is pour this in and cover the bottom. So while you could clean up the whole tray, it's going to get a bit dirty anyway. It's getting a bit of background noise there, Chase. And while you're thinking of your questions, we're going to slide this tray in and give this hive a helping hand to catch those small hive beetles. So just a bit of oil, making sure it's covering all tray surfaces, and then we'll slide that back in. Now one important check to do is if it is a hot day, there's a lot of bees out, some might fly underneath, so this is best done in the morning before there's a lot of activity. So I'm going to just do a quick check under here. I can't see any bees, and now I can slide this tray in because I don't want any bees to get stuck in this tray area. Okay, I'm sliding that in. Next thing is to make sure it's pushed all the way in and this cover is pushed up against the tray, because that's what stops bees getting in underneath and into the tray area. I've got a choice of vents up will allow more ventilation into the hive, vents down will shut off ventilation. This time of year it's pretty hot. I'm going to put the vents up, push that all the way in until it's in contact with the tray, and make sure the little L screws are done up nice and tight so that it can't allow this vented cover to move out. We don't want any bee gaps under there. And then you're set. We'll come back. Hopefully we will have caught some of those pesky little small hive beetles. You can have a look at this hive and see how it's going. We've got a bit of a mixture here. A couple of that you can activate the little ant guards on the legs here by putting some oil in them too, or some grease in those little ant guards down the bottom. And let's have a look in the side window. We've got a nice amount of bees, that's great. And you can actually see capping beneath their feet, so we've got a fair bit of honey stored in this hive too, which is fantastic. Any more questions?
Yes, Steve. One of the questions, just when you were emptying the tray there, is there ever any issue if you do have hive beetles or little maggoty things in the tray? Do you have to like bury them, or is it okay just to sort of put it into the ground or your garden or something?
Okay, so if you've got the early stages of a hive beetle attack and they've laid some eggs and those little maggots have fallen into the tray, then a great idea to get onto it and make sure you're catching those hive beetles. But if you do just tip them out, then yes, they will go into the ground and become hive beetles later on. So good idea to drown them. If you just put them into a bucket of water, they'll die. Or if you just fill the tray up and leave it for a while, fill it up with water, away from the hive, then they will also die that way too. So a couple of options there for you. Now sometimes you just get the wax moth, which are a larger grub, and they tend to go for the wax that's fallen through the screen from the bees doing their work in the hive. If you just clean out your tray, then that problem will go away. The wax moth won't have anything to feed on. Okay.
Fantastic. Another question, Cedar, we've got a few about the flow frames. Harry's tuning in from Brisbane and just saying the back windows, or the rear access cover, I suppose, of some of the frames always look full and capped and everything's looking good. But when they open up the hive, the middle seems to be completely empty. Is there any reason for this?
Yes. When the bees are hungry, they will start eating right above the brood nest to feed that honey to the young larvae below. So that's usually central in your hive. As time goes on and the bees are collecting and foraging more, they'll fill that in. So if you suspect your bees are hungry, then harvest the frames towards the edge if you need some honey, and then just leave the rest for the bees. If you have a look in the window, let's just go back to the hive we were harvesting, and look at that beautiful honey. It's just filled up that jar. That is fantastic. Yum yum. If we go back to this hive, we spoke about it briefly earlier, where you've got the frames here, but the hive isn't full. We can tell it's not completely full. So I've chosen an edge frame because I could see the capping beneath their feet over here, which you can still see, and the bees are pretty much standing on their capping while the honey's draining out beneath that capping. They'll repair the cells and the whole process starts again. Now, but otherwise look for the pattern of the bees filling or being hungry, and then it'll give you a good idea of whether or not they've eaten some honey out centrally. And if you've seen it filling for a while, which is this pattern here, and you can see it going into the side windows, then you can be pretty sure they're filling the centre frames up right above the brood nest as well. For your own interest, get in there and pull some frames, and just as you're doing, which is fantastic, and just start learning what it looks like here and what it looks like inside. And after a while you'll find this view here and the side windows a very useful view to know when it's time to harvest. Any more questions, Trace?
Yeah, sorry, Seeds. Question coming in. Cedar, how do you get bees?
Okay, so there's quite a few ways to get bees. The easiest way is contact a local bee breeder and ask for what's called a nuke. Some people call it a nuc, but I call it a nuke, N-U-C, which it's a short for nucleus. So what that is a going little beehive that's about half the size of one of these boxes. It has frames in it complete with the wax. It's got queen laying eggs, it's got honey stores, it's got pollen stores. It's just a small beehive. You can go and pick one of them up, take it to your place, put it where you want to situate your hive, then choose a nice day, which could be weeks later, and get out your smoker bee suit, take those frames out, put them into your bottom box, look after them, and they'll grow from there. Now, we showed you last week how to transfer from a hive into your brood box, so have a look at that video. We'll put a link in the comments below also. But there is a few other ways to get bees. One is take a split. So often you can ask around and see who's got overflowing hives with bees, and you'll actually be helping them by taking some of the frames out, particularly in the spring and early summer when their bees are likely to swarm. So you can take some of the frames out from the bottom box, make sure there's some eggs down the cells, and do what's called a split. And we've got lots of videos showing you how to do that, and also at the beekeeper.org we've got some great training there as well, where you can learn how to take a split. Often the person you're taking it from can guide you through that process as well. And you've got basically a nucleus hive or a starter hive then without a queen. You can buy a queen in from a queen breeder, or if there's eggs on the frames, you can then let them raise their own queen, and most of the time they will, and away you go. Look after them and they'll grow. Another way is to catch a swarm, which we've got lots of videos showing you how to do that as well. And it's a fun thing to do. If you're near an apiary that's got lots of hives in the springtime, you'll often see swarms, and you can shake them into your box and take them home, and they'll start from the swarm. You've also got a package, which is like an artificial swarm that you can order in the mail, where a beekeeper simply shakes a lot of bees off frames into a box that's got lots of ventilation, and they can post that to you, usually with a mated queen in a little queen cage. And what that'll do is give you a queen for that hive to get started, because if they don't have any frames with eggs, they'll need a queen. It'll come in a little cage, and there'll be syrup in the package usually for the bees to feed on as well while they're in transit. You get some funny looks from your postal service as they drop this buzzing box of stinging insects on your doorstep. And another way is what's called a bait hive, where you put a hive near existing beehives, usually 6 or 12 feet off the ground, and just use a single brood box in size and hope that the bees move in. And that can work sometimes, but it's pretty unreliable. So there's all the ways to get started.
Fantastic. So are there any considerations for your bees in unpredictable weather conditions?
So here we've got a lot of rain, so one thing we've done today is show you how to activate your pest management tray if you have small hive beetles in your area and it's very humid. So in those rainy times, then a good idea to activate your pest management tray. Also empty out your tray from time to time, because if you've got driving rain coming in the entrance, then your tray might fill up with water. So take the opportunity to empty that water out and give your tray a clean. And in windy times, you might like to activate these roof locks here just by screwing them in. If we get 80k winds coming up this slope here, then it will blow the roofs off of the classic hive. So when it came to the Flow Hive 2, we decided to both add a bit more overlap of the hive here, a bit more telescopic of this gabled roof, and also these wing locks you can do up, these wing screws, just to hold the roof onto the hive. So that's another one. If your hives, you've only just put a box on and it's still sort of sliding around, then windy weather could make it move a little bit. It's unusual. The bees usually do a great job of keeping it in place and sticking all the parts together. So it's often a question of new beekeepers is, how come you haven't provided locks to lock the hive together? And you can do that, but also we find it's unnecessary.
Oh, fantastic, Seed. I'm glad you mentioned that, because quite a few people ring us up and ask us about that locking mechanism. So thanks for that. And also, look, we have to do a big shout out to Bija, who's our fabulous customer support worker. She's having a holiday at the moment, and she's in Bali, and she's just shouted out to us. So Bija, we're shouting back at you.
Fantastic. Also let us know whereabouts in the world you're tuning in from. Super interesting to us. We've got a global audience of beekeepers and customers all around the world just tuning in, and it's just fantastic. One day we'll have to have you all here to do it in the real. Imagine if you're all here, there'll be thousands of people all around watching the live Q&A. So here we have a full jar of honey now. Now this frame's really given us a lot of honey. Sometimes you can actually overflow these 2 litre jars. Up to here is about 2 litres, so we're getting over 2 litres now, which means we've got 3 kilograms of honey. So what we're going to do is show you how to finish the harvest. Now we're going to get this key, turn it back to a 90, pull it to a 90 again. Now if you can, leave that in that position just for a minute or two to allow all of the parts to sink back down and really form a good position. Now if you just let the frames bounce back up again, all those moving parts, with a quick closure, you get troubles later where the parts aren't in line and they're putting a whole lot of wax to still use the cells, but then that can cause spillage in your hive later on because you've got all these clumps of wax stopping the flow. So you really want all the parts to push back like that, so leave it for a minute or two if you can. And also, if you can't really just turn the flow off and put the cap back in until it's really slowed down, otherwise the remaining honey is just going to flood back into the hive. A little bit going into the hive is fine, the bees will just lick that up and reuse it, but let's say you decided your jar wasn't big enough, you only had a small jar, and you just put the cap back in and walked away, and the remaining honey is still going to dribble down into your trough at the bottom, overflow it and into the hive. Callum's just found a bee on a flower here, look at that. It's beautiful at the moment, so many flowering things around. So next, once you've waited for this to really finish, and I can close that up now, it's slowing down, I'll let the rest just go back to the bees. So I'll find my little cap here and I can now, let's see, there it is. The caddy's handy to keep all your bits and pieces in. So I'm going back to the 90 and out, and I can put the cap in the top now. And at the bottom, I can take this out and just do a quick swap for this little cap here. And what you'll find, the remaining honey will go back in. There's a little leak back point to allow the honey to go back in for the bees to reuse. And there we have a beautiful jar of honey. And I'm going to lick the spoils out of the tube here. Yum. So don't leave this in the apiary for your bees. You don't want to leave honey out. Bees will get a taste for collecting honey instead of nectar and might get in a robbing mood and decide to steal honey from other hives, which can spread pathogens, and it can be a bit of a disaster for weak colonies when they get all their honey stolen. So take that back to your kitchen and wash that for next time. Yum, yum. That is such a good flavour. I can put that lid on. And there we have it. Beautiful honey. Thank you, bees. Any more questions?
Yes, so there's Kerry's in Perth, and her question, or their question is, they caught a small swarm about 6 weeks ago, and the bees are actually struggling. But then they've caught another very small swarm yesterday after a freak storm. The question is, can they add the new swarm in with the other swarm, or do they have to keep them separate?
Okay, if you've got small swarms, you can actually merge them together, and that way you'll have one bigger colony instead of two really weak ones. So to do that, what we've found the best way is you put one box on top of the other, but instead of just letting them just fight instantly, you put a sheet or two of newspaper in between, poke some holes in it, the bees will start chewing away and they'll slowly merge the two colonies together. Now I say to poke some holes for ventilation, and also get them started chewing away at the newspaper. So let's say you had a small swarm in this box, a small swarm in another box, and you put it right on top like that. You would leave the queen excluder out and just put a couple of sheets of newspaper, and those colonies will merge. And what will likely happen is there'll be a bit of a fight and one queen will remain. So you could go and find the queen and take it away, but you could just also let them sort it out, and the reigning queen will become the egg layer of your new merged hive. Any more questions? Keep them coming.
Yeah, some great questions. So, do the bees get stressed when you're harvesting the honey?
Well, the whole idea in the beginning was, can't we just harvest honey in a gentle, easy way where it's easy for the beekeeper and just tap it out while the bees are just doing their thing? And I'm very happy to say we're we achieve that, and it works better than I ever imagined. You can see the bees just going about their business as we've actually drained the honey from that exact frame. They're now going to chew away all the wax and actually repair the cells, and the whole process starts again. So it works very nicely. Now, having said that, taking honey away from bees will add stress to the colony, no matter how you do it, because they've been busy creating a lot of honey, which is also a nice thermal mass. And if you suddenly take it all, then you have added stress to your colony. There's a lot of work to do in the hive repairing all of those cells. Sometimes half the bees will have to vacate to make room to repair all the cells and get the humidity right in the hive. So there can be stress caused by harvesting a lot of honey at once, no matter how you do it. Having said that, it's a good idea to harvest a lot of your honey in the springtime to make sure your hive doesn't get honey bound. You want enough space in your hive for the queen to lay eggs. So probably the most gentle way is to harvest a frame like we have done today. And then when you see another frame full, harvest another frame, and so on. And that's very much minimal disturbance to your hive as your bees go about their business. And as you can see, they've hardly noticed anything has gone on. They're still going in and out the entrance as per normal. Whereas if you harvest all the frames at once, you find a big ball of bees at the front and more disturbance to your hive. So it's up to you how you want to do it. I recommend just doing 1, 2 or 3 frames at once and coming back to do the others, and that's way it's less of a disturbance for your bees.
Fantastic. So have you ever noticed that bees have different markings depending on their hives?
Yes, so bees are often a bit of a mixture, and bee breeders will have their favourite breeds. The Italian's a really common one. Beekeepers will like to breed where they're quite gold, and you get other bees that are really quite black. And the genetics have just come from different parts of Europe, where you've got the Irish black bee and you've got the golden Italian bee and so on. In a hive, you'll often get quite a mixture because your queen has mated with 30 or more drones from surrounding hives in your area, brought those genetics back to the hive, and then what you'll get is quite all the same mother but different fathers, and therefore different looks on your bees. Look at that one, that's a bit of a golden Italian there, quite a lot of gold stripes. Keep the questions coming in.
Fantastic. So, Lisa, you may have answered this one, but basically Lisa harvested 2 end frames a few weeks ago, and the middle frames were full. But the next day after harvesting the 2 end frames, the middle frames were empty. Does that mean the bees have eaten all the honey?
Possibly. They might have taken the honey out of the observation window side here and condensed it. Bees will often move honey around in the hive to make sure they're getting a nice full frame. So if you've harvested some frames, you might find them taking from other frames as they rebuild and fill those frames again. Patience will get you back to having full frames again.
Yeah, it's funny you were saying that before, Sue, because I think one of my hives, they never, a couple of the frames, they never fill the end frames, but I have a little inspection and I can see that they're full, and you sort of mentioned that before, so it's good to know that.
Yes, some bees are a bit reluctant to fill this beautiful end frame view, but as I said earlier, make sure there's not a whole lot of light getting in there, because if you leave that cover off, all of that honey will be removed over the next couple of days out of the end frame window. They'll pull it back further into the hive, so a little tip there. But otherwise, as I said, some bees are just like that, and you can learn to spot when frames are full by looking down in between them and looking at your side windows.
Fantastic. So if the hive is dark all the time, how do the bees know it's daytime and time to go out to work? And do they ever sleep? Or maybe they have little bedside lamps or something.
They shift work, so you'll often see bees sleeping down cells, and you'll see them in the end frame before it's full. You'll see them just bee down there, and you go, "Is it dead?" And you tap it, and it's not dead; it's just in its bed. And you give it a little tap, and it'll wake up and wriggle out. So the hive never stops, but the bees have to sleep just like all animals, and they will just find an empty cell to take a kip in, and then they'll get woken up or wake up themselves and get back to work. So around the clock they go. You'll always hear a beehive buzzing. Now, as to how they know when it's time to wake up, they will see light coming in the entrance of the hive. So some beekeepers, particularly commercial ones who are after the maximum honey production, will purposefully face their hives towards the morning sun, so the light streams in, wakes up the bees and gets them going that little bit earlier, so they get more honey production.
Fantastic. So Matthew wants me to ask you, how often do you replace the queens here at Flow?
So not very often, actually. We often let them replace their own queens. We're not after maximum production like commercial operators, where they will routinely go through every year or two and replace all the queens just to make sure they've got very strong egg layers. Now, we don't need to do that. We just need hives that are a joy to manage and look after themselves to the best extent, and also produce honey. Now, if we find there's a trait we don't like, that's when we will requeen. So let's say we have aggression and that's starting to sting people around, then we'll find out which hive is more aggressive. Mowing in front of them is a good way to do that. Wear your bee suit, but some hives get quite upset about that, and you can see which ones show more territorial behaviour by their entrance. That's sort of how we go, except if we find a failing colony where the numbers are dropping and we can tell the queen isn't doing as well as other hives around. We'll get in there, take away the old queen, introduce a new one from a queen breeder, or sometimes from another one of our hives, and that way you've got new egg laying capacity with that new virile queen, and the hive gets on its feet again. Lots of eggs are being laid, and the numbers flourish, and away it goes.
Fantastic. Jason was asking, on the last inspection, they found what looked like 4 drone cells actually in the super. Not sure how this has occurred. They opened them up and there was white larvae in 3 out of the 4 of them would look like fully formed bees. Any ideas on how that may have happened?
Yes.
And what to do, I suppose?
Yes, so that can happen. Sometimes you can get eggs laid in your cells, and there's 2 reasons for it. One is a queen has snuck up through the excluder. Perhaps when she's young, she's skinny enough to slide through the excluder, and she might be stuck up the top, and it's the only place she can lay eggs. Now, if that happens, you'll get a lot of brood up there. And how to fix that problem is to either find the queen and move her down, or if you can't spot the queen, then simply just take the excluder out, shake all of the bees off the frames, or brush them all off, put the excluder back in place, put your top box back on, and that way you know the queen has to be downstairs. When you're shaking the bees off, you're shaking them back into the brood box. You don't want to orphan your queen from the hive, or she may not make it back again. The other reason you can get brood in flow frames is if the hive has lost their queen, then sometimes you'll get the workers laying eggs. Now, they're unfertilized eggs, so they can only be drones or male bees. So that's the other reason it could happen. If you've got drone in the flow frames, then, so you've got eggs in the flow frames, then you might need to check down below and make sure you've got brood down below as well. If you find there's no young larvae down below, then either the queen's up top or you don't have a queen at all, and either way you'll need to do something about it. Well done for spotting that. As far as brood in the flow frame goes, it doesn't harm your flow frames. They will behave as normal. after the brood has emerged. So once you've shaken all the bees down, put the queen excluder back in place, then just simply wait a couple of weeks for any young bees to emerge, and then you can go ahead and harvest frames as they're full.
Fantastic. A few people coming in, I think a few of our US customers asking about cold winter weather, and are there things that our beekeepers in the really cold climates, and what is a too cold climate to have a bee, that they need to be doing to prepare for the winter?
Okay, it's hard to imagine from hot, steamy subtropics here on the east coast of Australia, where I'm sweating here on a rainy day, but conditions all around the world do really change, and I'm not the best to answer your really cold climate beekeeping, but if you have a look at the beekeeper.org or some of our streams that were put out previously on cold climate beekeeping, you'll get some tips there. Now, I will run through, however, some of the things I do know about cold climate beekeeping. So if you're in the northern hemisphere and you're up in the northern areas, which we do have a lot of flow hive beekeepers in places like Canada, in places like Nebraska, also in the colder areas of Europe, and the flow hive works very well. You're still harvesting honey in the warmer time of year, and what is different is you just need to prepare your hive for winter. Now, where you are will determine on what you need to do. A lot of areas you might just need to remove the queen excluder and let the bees finish off the remaining honey stores to let them survive over the winter time. If you've got a long cold winter ahead, the main thing you're considering is there enough honey stores for the bees to survive until there's flowers again? And if the answer is no, find out how much honey you need to leave for your bees in those cold areas, and if you don't have enough, you'll need to feed the bees prior to winter, preferably. But if you've missed that opportunity and the winter's encroaching and the bees don't have enough stores, then you're still better off feeding them anyway. Some people put fondant up on top of the roof area for the bees to chew on over winter. Some people like to feed a sugar solution. So let's say you've got a jar like this, you've got holes in the lid, you've got 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, you've warmed it up, you've dissolved the sugar, you've let it cool again, put it in the jar, and you can tip that upside down over the top of the hole in the inner cover, and the bees can suck and get some nectar replacement, if you like. Sugar's not as good for bees as flower nectar, but letting them starve isn't good either, so you're better off feeding them sugar than letting them starve if you don't have enough stores for your bees to survive that long cold winter ahead. So a couple of options there, but as you go further north, right up in the very, very long, cold, dark areas where the winters go on for what seems like forever, then different strategies are afoot there, where you sometimes will send your bees away for somebody else to look after them over the winter time. So there is extremes, and there's ways to keep your bees even in those really extreme parts of the world. We've got to meet the beekeeper about that. If you have a look at our Meet the Beekeepers, you'll find a beautiful one all about that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Glenda's, Glenda, they're new to beekeeping, and they've had the bees have been set up for about 10 days. They have 5 frames full of brood and honey, and they've drawn out but have not capped about 1.5 of the last 3 frames. They're in Western Australia, sorry. Lots of nectar is available. Would you think it's time to maybe put the super on yet?
What we find is it's best to wait till they've drawn out all the wax in all the frames. So if there's a lot of bees in your box and all of your wooden frames in the bottom, they've got wax drawn out to fill most of the frame, then go ahead and put your super on. You can put it in early. In Perth it's going to be hot. You can just put the super on earlier than that, and that'll be fine. But what you want to do if there's a cold time ahead is make sure you're not adding extra space to your hive that the bees don't need yet. So a good idea, just as a rule of thumb, is waiting till the bees have filled all of those frames out before you put your super on. But as I said, in your climate right now, summer in Perth, you can go ahead and put the super on anytime.
Fantastic. See, Richard's got a bit of a question, wondering about, do the bees build the queen cell around an already laid egg, or would they build the cell and then move the egg?
So that's a great question. So if you've got the answer to that, put it in the comments below. But it is said that bees can move eggs, but what they normally do is they will build the cell around an existing egg. And beekeepers can manipulate that if they want a hive to grow a queen, just by making a normal cell look like a queen cell, just by pinching it out a bit and getting that shape of a queen cup. And if it's got an egg down there, they'll go, oh, this looks like a queen cell. They'll feed that young larvae royal jelly for its entire gestation, and it will be supersized into a queen. So generally no in terms of moving eggs, but it is said they can move eggs.
Great. Question, got a classic hive and started spotting a few hive beetles on the bottom core flute of the classic. Just wondering, at what numbers do you consider that there are too many hive beetles, and then your tips to control them in a classic hive?
Okay, here we are with a classic hive. We've got a core flute down the bottom, and that slides out, and that could do with a clean actually. It's been a little while, and you can see the wax that's gone through. You've got some wax moth eggs, so let's get rid of them just by have a clean start here. Now, catching hive beetles with the classic, we do have some videos on showing you how to do that, but basically there's a few different methods. One is you could slide in a very thin tray, perhaps a lid of a Tupperware box, and you could put some oil in there and slide that in. Now, bear in mind, a bee sticking its head through the mesh, from my testing, can get about 7 millimeters. So you want to keep the oil more than 7 millimeters away, because you don't want bees licking down at the oil. So you can make your own hive beetle oil trap on here. Or another one is you can get a fabric that's got a fluffy backing. So if you go down to your fabric store, you'll find there's the kind they use for covering tables in takeaway shops and restaurants. You can use that type of fabric that's got the furry backing. Use some double-sided tape on here, generous amount of it, stick the fabric down fluffy side up. Make sure that it's not bowing up, or the bees will pull it through the screen. But you want to make sure it's well stuck to this, and what you can do is then slide that back in the lower position, and you can watch as beetles then will get their feet tangled in that fluff. So that's another little thing you can do for catching beetles with a classic flow hive. And we covered earlier about catching beetles with our Flow Hive 2 Plus here, and let's have a look and see if we've got any yet. So we slid a tray of oil in here, and so far not seeing any beetles, but you never know your luck. No beetles yet. So we can check again in a few days' time and see how many beetles we've caught in this pest management tray. Making sure you're pressing the cover all the way in to get a good seal, so bees can't get up into that oil, because oil will kill bees as well as beetles. Time for a couple more questions.
Great, Sue. Can you get honeycomb from the flow hive?
Absolutely. So there's a few different ways you can collect honeycomb from a flow hive, because Bearing in mind, a flow hive is pretty much a normal beehive down below. And in fact, we promote naturally drawn comb, which is even better for collecting some honeycomb from, because there's no foundation in there and no wires. So if you pull one of the frames from the edge, most of the time it's all honey, or you can just cut a shape out like you see me do sometimes and take that honeycomb away, put it on a cheese platter. The bees will be very quick to fill that back in. So the beautiful thing about naturally drawn frames is you don't need to go through that process of waxing and wiring. You can just chop some honeycomb out right in the field and put it straight back in. Another way is you can collect honey under the roof. So there's a hole in the inner cover. You take that cap out, the bees will come up and build a whole lot of honeycomb up here if they are a busy colony. Now that can get a bit messy after a while, and you might get sick of cleaning honeycomb out of the roof of the hive, so you might like to contain them to a smaller area by getting, say, a Pyrex baking dish and putting it over the top of the hole so they quarantine to a smaller zone, and then you can watch as they build their beautiful freeform honeycomb up there in the roof cavity. And after you've enjoyed it, you can save their wax for making candles with your kids.
Great, Seeds. Do you ever need to clean the flow frames?
That is a good question. Let's have some more of that beautiful Goya honey, which we also call wild quince. It's got amazing flavour. So, leaving the flow frames in the hive is a great way to keep them good without having to clean them, because the bees service them and look after them. The one spot you might need to clean is this area down here, where, let's say you've done what we've done here and you've left these caps in for a long time and there's a bit of build up in there, so you could get some fermented honey in there, or even crystallized candied honey, or sometimes a whole lot of debris falling through and gunking up that area. So easy way to clean that is you get a thin cloth on your flow key, wet that cloth and just wrap it around the flow key, which I've put somewhere. Here it is, thank you. And so you're just wrapping that cloth around, you can poke it into the area, give it a good wipe out, and away you go again. Having said all of that, if you've had your frames 5 years or so, they've been through a lot of seasons of beekeeping, people are finding that's when it's a good time to give them a thorough clean. So what you'll need to do is take those frames out of the hive, set them in the open position. Let's say you've harvested the honey, you've taken them out of the hive, and get a pressure washer and just blast all the old wax off. Even better is you feed that pressure washer with a hot water feed from your hot water system, and if you've got it nice and hot above 70 degrees, it will really help remove even more wax and gunk from your old flow frames. Let them dry, set them to the correct position, put them back in again, and away you go. So that's something you can do if you want to give them a good thorough clean up.
Great. Kim tuning in from Insta saying loves the lives and all the support we give, so thanks for that. And their question is, can you do a split in summer, and what is a vertical split?
You certainly can split in the summertime, and here in the subtropical region of Australia we can split all year round. Simply when the bees are really busy is a good time to take a split. When you see an excess of bees building up at that hive entrance, you open the hive windows, there's a lot of bees, you can hardly see the comb, great time to do a split, alleviate the primary swarm trigger and give yourself another hive, or if you don't need another hive, somebody else surely will. A vertical split is something I used to do when I was keeping bees in a conventional way and selling honey to the local shops. I used to have the hives just on stands and banked up pretty close together, so there wasn't necessarily enough room just to put the split beside. So what I did was a vertical split, which just means, let's say you've added a second brood box, and what you do is wait till the queens laying in both boxes, or you can manipulate that from square one by moving some of the frames from the bottom box to the top box. So you've split half the frames from the bottom up into a second brood box here. Then what you can do is put a divider board in, which you can use a piece of tin or a piece of plywood or whatever you want, and what that'll do is separate the split from the mother colony, and if there's eggs on any of those frames, then the bees will go ahead and raise a queen, and then you've got 2 hives. And when it's a going thing, you can take that hive and move it to another location. So that's what we call a vertical split. I find it a bit easier just to go sideways these days. You just set up another brood box beside it, take half the frames out, put them in the other box, make sure there's eggs on there, and they'll usually raise their own queen, and away you go. Now, a little tip is you can move the weaker colony into the lion's share of the returning bees. That way you're propping up the weaker colony, giving it a lot more returning forages. We've got lots of videos showing you how to do splits, both on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and also at the beekeeper.org. So have a look there if you want to get some inspiration to do your hive splits. Thank you very much for tuning in and all your great questions. Let us know what you'd like us to cover next week. Today we were showing you how to harvest honey in the rain, and also how to activate your pest management trays for catching those pesky hive beetles. Good thing to do in those hot, humid times like we have here in the summer of the subtropics, the east coast of Australia. Catching hive beetles is a great idea, otherwise they might take over a weak colony. Same time next week, tune in and let us know if you've got questions for us, and we will answer them